Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Massachusetts General Hospital telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I'm seeing patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist setting. We both support a number of traditional MedTech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for the clinician and for the patient. You can find us speaking local, nationally, and internationally. So we'll also talk about that sometimes. And we're about to publish. Are we close? I mean, we're about to publish.
It has a front and a back cover now. Our first book in telecardiology. So we're almost there.
So we're about to focus our first ever, not our first ever textbook, because Emi's published a number of textbooks. And yeah, I actually have a nephrology textbook at one point in my life. But our first ever digital health for cardiologist Springer textbook. MedTech Insights is a live weekly interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview two guest leaders in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. You can watch us live through the MedTech Insights Facebook page, either Ami or my personal Facebook page, the Vanguard.Health YouTube page, and through my personal LinkedIn page. When you tune in live, you can write comments in any of those places. We will try to feature your comments. Please tell us your name, where you're watching from, what you're working on, and any questions that you might have for our guest. We love the comments, so please don't be shy. All shows are recorded and available after the fact on our website, Vanguard.Health/MedTech Insights. Be sure to keep up with the show by joining our mailing list and look for us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Over to you, Ami.
Fantastic. Exciting to have everybody here today. I promised Dr. Joe that when we began, we would not talk about cardiology and telemedicine, digital health every single time.
She couldn't
stop. But today we get to do that, and I'm incredibly excited. So we won't take long to bring our guests on today. We have Dr. Ritu Thamman and we have Nicholas Conn with us today. So we'll start by bringing out Nicholas first, just as a reminder for our audience. Both of our guests, as well as Dr. Joe and I, are representing our own opinions and not the opinions of the companies for which we work or those with which we affiliate. Nicholas is coming out first. He is the founder and chief scientific officer of Casana. Prior to founding Casana, Nick was a research scientist at the Rochester Institute of Technology and completed his PhD in microsystems engineering in 2016, which is when he actually developed the technology of Casana, which is, wait for it, a toilet seat-based cardiovascular monitoring system. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. Nick's passion is to bring clinical-grade medical devices to the consumer, but really the idea is making it part and parcel of what daily life entails, a way of you knowing your cardiovascular health without having to really take very many extra steps. And we love that concept. His expertise spans business development, medical devices, ultra low power systems, really important to be able to implement, physiology, signal processing, algorithm development, and now foraying into heart failure monitoring. So much to talk about today. Why don't we start by bringing out Nicholas Conn?
Welcome, Nicholas.
Hi, Ami. Hi, Jen. Thank you both so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is great to have you. So we're incredibly excited because this is, to all those out there who are studying, completing their PhDs, slogging through it for the umpteenth year, the idea that what you started working on then can become your future, not just project, but company, is really phenomenally exciting. So maybe just a little bit about your course and then really, I think everybody wants to know, so we'll get there right up front. How did we end up in a toilet seat? Because, it's a unique model, but it's doing really well. So why don't we let you take the floor?
Thank you. So as mentioned, I came up with this concept during my PhD at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And, previously to my PhD, I had a ton of experience with medical devices, wearable technologies, building instrumentation. And the big challenge that all these devices have is that they're not pleasant to use or people forget. So when we were looking at opportunities to make a real difference in this space, we realized that patient adherence and getting people to actually use devices was a big challenge. So I said, let's throw electrodes on a toilet seat. And my advisor, Dave Borkholder, said, that's a really good idea. I ran upstairs, I strapped some electrodes on, I made sure that, proof of concept one, it worked. And then over the years, developed the technology, created the business plan, formed Casana, initially as CEO and now as Chief Scientific Officer, led us through 2 rounds of fundraising. And here we are now, a fast growing team, always looking for new engineering talent. But we're very excited about what we're doing. And our big mission is really to take these technologies that are everywhere, refine them, add additional research onto it to be able to create additional clinical relevance, but primarily make it easy for people to use. Make it so this technology can seamlessly integrate into their everyday life. And the toilet seat is just an example of that. There's many ways that technology can get integrated, but what we really like about the toilet seat is that there's no new behaviors to learn. Most people will use it almost every day. And you get skin contact and it's not forced upon you. So it's a really great platform for us to be able to measure a slew of things from people who sit on it.
Fantastic. So I think you maybe have some slides to actually share so that our audience gets a sense of, what are we really looking at and how different is it from what we, use every day right now. So I don't know if you want to share those now maybe and tell us a little bit about the story.
So looking forward to the slides. We love questions and comments from our audience. We have Thomas Henry, who is watching from Cambridge. Thank you, Thomas, for watching from Cambridge. And then we're going to see some slides. So Nicholas, sorry, I am having a little bit of trouble with this technologically.
That's okay. I will. Here we go.
Oh, awesome. Here we
go. So it seems, unique, right? The toilet seat itself is actually completely self-contained. It doesn't plug into the wall. It's battery powered. We have wireless radios in there, so we can communicate over Wi-Fi and cellular, which even alleviate the need to set up a Wi-Fi device in your home, which for many can be challenging. The seat itself, from an instrumentation perspective, captures an electrocardiogram, which measures the electrical activity of the heart, a photoplasmogram, which is basically the same instrument that are in pulse oximeters that measure your blood oxygenation, as well as most optical sensors or wearable sensors that measure heart rate optically. But then we have a really cool instrument, my favorite, and one that actually was the subject of a lot of research during my PhD, which is the Ballistic Cardiogram. So the Ballistic Cardiogram measures the mechanical forces of the heart. So as your heart contracts, it builds up pressure. And then when your valve opens, your aortic valve, blood's pushed upward. To simplify the physics, that upward momentum will actually push your body down slightly. So we're picking up the slight apparent changes in your body weight as your heart beats due to cardiac ejection and the cardiac cycle. So by combining these measurements, we're able to leverage some novel algorithms that were the key contributions that I've made actually to the field of remote patient monitoring from a scientific standpoint, to be able to measure blood pressure without a cuff, blood oxygenation, heart rate, and even in the future, we're looking to measure stroke volume and cardiac output, which is how much blood your heart pumps either per minute or per beat. So what does the actual seat look like? That's always the question when we get out of cartoon form. And here it is in an actual bathroom. It looks pretty inconspicuous. There's electrodes on the surface, sure, but it fits like any standard toilet seat does. It really blends in. It's got the nice soft close hinge, and it really works like any standard toilet seat. The idea is that you install it and then forget about it. There's nothing else that you need to do. The battery lasts a number of years, so you're not even worried about replacing the battery often. This follows everything that we want to do at Kasana, from the seat itself to the dashboard for the physician or the advanced practice providers who are monitoring the data streams. We want to make it so that it's easy, it's simple. This data set is going to be very unique. And one of the challenges that we have is making sure that we can drive outcomes. At Casana, and really for everybody, I think, who's working in the in-home space, the end goal is to drive outcomes. These outcomes are the end goal. And many modern approaches are taking a data-based method where let's just get a ton of data on everything that we can 24/7, and that is great. There's a lot of benefits to having data, but it does result in data overload and alarm fatigue. So having data that's not necessarily actionable doesn't necessarily help outcomes. And at Kasana, we're taking this even a step further, because when you have all this great technology, if it's not going to be adopted and utilized by those who need to be monitored, you can't drive outcomes either. So we started at the bottom, really focusing on adherence, where we've solved the adherence problem. People can use the seat as part of their daily life. There's nothing new to learn, as I mentioned. And then the data we capture is focused on relevance, being able to provide the clinician, such as yourselves, with insights on what should be done. Should we change the medications? Are we catching signs of deterioration before patients are even aware of the symptoms? With the end goal, of course, being to drive action, which whether that is changing medication, calling somebody in for more blood work, if there's something that seems out of whack, there's a lot of ways that then this tool can be used to drive better outcomes, such as better medication management for hypertension, or even reducing hospitalization rates for heart failure.
Fantastic. Well, I think, I'm looking at Dr. Thamman, who's backstage right now, and I know she's excited as I am to really talk about what we're doing, how we make adherence happen, what does adherence really mean, and how do we capture data. So let me introduce her. We'll bring her out, and then we will all engage.
So much great information. We do just have some comments from the audience. We have Martin, who's watching from Budapest, and then we and Martin, who's watching from Budapest, is also working for the Global Health Impact Fund and Network in San Francisco, always looking to create partnerships or find startups to invest and mentor in, and he wants to set up a time to chat. So we can. Oh, but it's got a nice name, right, Nick? It's not. I call it the smart toilet because that's how I file it in my head, and I feel like it's not as good of a name as what you gave it. It's called the Heart Seat. So setting up a time to talk about the Heart Seat and bringing it to Budapest or San Francisco. Sorry. So we're going to really appreciate you watching, Martin, and I'm sure Nicholas is available and would love to chat more. And we love to hear from everyone. And then, Ami, you want to bring out Dr. Thamman?
Yeah, let's bring out Dr. Thamman. She's a cardiologist, assistant clinical professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. She also really leads us at the American College of Cardiology. Most recently, she's working with the Consumer Technology Association, collaborating to really help guide patients and clinicians in evaluating and choosing cardiac devices and technologies. How do you understand them? How do you figure out what's right for you as this field is burgeoning, as you mentioned, Nick? I'm so excited to have her there. She is also the founder of #TeleMedNow, which is a now bi-monthly, originally weekly during COVID, telemedicine Twitter forum, where we really have a great group of people who've been advancing telemedicine, not just in cardiology, but kind of throughout the medical field. So Dr. Ritu Thamman.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I loved hearing about the heart toilet. What great 2 words to put together.
Thank you.
Heart seat, right? Heart seat? Not okay. We're sorry. No, are you getting? Because too nice to correct me. Is it the heart seat? It's a heart seat.
In many directions with that, given that we're talking about a toilet. I'm married to a colorectal surgeon, and so we always have toilet jokes all the time. So
this is the connection to Dr. Watson.
Exactly. So,
okay.
In any case, I think many of the points that you raise are perfectly aligned with how we should be thinking about how, number one, do we evaluate such devices? For example, that's some of the work that I'm doing with Mike McConnell, who's my co-chair, to try to come up with some sort of guidance. We're not calling it a definite guidelines, but guidance for the consumer and for cardiologists in particular who are going to be using these types of technologies to monitor heart rate, to monitor blood pressure. So we need to know, first of all, how easy is it to use? And that's one aspect, because that's part of the patient engagement and adherence. As you say, everyone uses a toilet every day, so it's pretty easy to get them to sit on it. But the other point is how efficacious is this? So if we had a gold standard, and that might be coming into the doctor's office and getting your heart rate and blood pressure and everything checked, how well does this measure up? Any of these devices, for yours that we're discussing in particular, we would need to know, and maybe that's something in future we will get to know. In addition, we also need to know if it is efficacious, is it going to improve outcomes? Ultimately, to get insurance companies or whoever to pay will require some kind of assessment in that nature. And as you know, randomized clinical trials are going to take so long. They're expensive and they take a long time. So we're going to need to do micro randomized trials in very small increments to figure out what are we measuring that will actually be beneficial and lead to the better outcomes.
So is this a new concept that I am just unaware of? And I mean, you're like, Jennifer's just unaware of this, the micro trials. Sorry, could you?
It's a micro randomized trial, and it's been used in behavioral therapy, for example. It will be used for weight loss. That's one area where it's been used heavily. So, for example, you'll get a text message using your GPS on your phone. You'll get a text message as you walk into McDonald's. Don't do it. Or
okay. And then I'm going to install an app that blocks that text message.
And then other area is for steps and exercise. Clearly that also lends itself for these things. But then we want to increase adherence. But how do we do that? What is the right time to deliver that text message? Right? We don't know. Is it before? Is it like immediately thereafter? So the micro randomized trial will make these small adjustments and send the message, just in time. They're called JITAI, spelled JITAI. And in that way, we're able to decipher, is there a better time? Should we do it in the morning? When the person wakes up? And there are going to be ways that we can individualize this. So this is really a burgeoning field. In cardiology, there's very little of it. But in the future, because we have so many of these sensors and biosensors monitoring heart rate, and then they're giving you all these additional features. Well, great. Like he said, we have this data. What are we going to do with this data? We only get paid to look at the data once a month right now for RPM, right? So, but that might change. And we're looking for that to change probably in the future as we can show that it's beneficial and it helps in improving outcomes for chronic diseases or maybe even prevention. So that's...
I love how many different areas this conversation touches upon. Nick, you had mentioned before, right? Heart failure. And Ritu, as you describe how we do this, if we think about cardiovascular disease, it's not even just cardiologists. We think about hypertension, we think about weight, we think about diabetes management. All of these things are really, feeding the cardiovascular syndromes that we care for. And all of them require small changes that occur constantly. And the place we realize this is when you bring a patient in the hospital. Boy, we're tweaking constantly. Nurses at the bedside talking to the doctor. We're figuring out what to do. We're changing it. Then we send them home and we say, well, call me in 3 days and let's see how it went. And then they may or may not call in 3 days because to remember to call your doctor when everything else in life is going on is busy. So then it's 3 months later and the weight has gone up or the blood pressure has been out of control or the sugars have been jumping up and down. And now we're backtracking. But we really have great data that we can get in the community that is trustworthy now from many different companies. And we have algorithms that help us know what is the right thing to do. And we have titration mechanisms. So, I think cardiology is ripe for taking this data and saying, we're not just going to feed it to you, but we're going to also feed it back to the patient and help them engage and advocate for themselves, because the payment system is not there yet, and it will take a little time to get there. We're not going to have a payment system that counts for every little time that we talk to somebody. That's not going to be feasible. And so the remote patient monitoring, the RPM kind of system that we're talking about for payment, will remain something that's more broad, and we'll need to engage our patients better. I see Thomas Henry has a question. What is sample size for micro RCT versus conventional RCT, please, Ritu?
Well, that's a great question. As you know, for one of the reasons a regular conventional randomized controlled trial is so expensive is because you need huge numbers to get power. But in a micro-randomized trial, the intervention is very small, so the numbers are also smaller. And that makes it less expensive and also shorter in duration, because so much of the technology is changing and so rapidly. We can't wait 5 years to see if this thing is working. I'm going to put in the chat an article from CIRC Outcomes that really went into the cardiology trials, micro-randomized trials, beautifully with our editor-in-chief, Ramaji. And it's great. And if I'll try to pull that up right now. Great visuals in there, also describing, just in time. That's really the critical part. Timing is everything. We know that with our patients, and across the United States, this is a universal problem of adherence with medicines. We know even patients who've had heart attacks, within 6 months, more than half are not taking any of their medicines. When you look at those numbers, those are really abysmal. So we're not, we need to do something else. We have to, like Ami was just saying, we need those touch points in between. So if someone goes home and call me in 3 days, but they're not doing that. If we had those.
And Nick, did you want to contribute to the touch point, maybe being a toilet seat in our super fancy, my bathroom does not look like this. Maybe Ami's bathroom looks like that.
If you could make my bathroom look like this, then I would, definitely have this.
Oh, yeah. With the fancy hand soap.
I think it's a great point, though, thinking about, these patients after an event or after a big change, such as a discharge from hospitalization. It's a lot to keep track of. There are patients who do great, right? There are patients who will follow to the letter every single thing that you tell them to do. But knowing which patients to focus on sometimes can be a challenge. Knowing when patients are really falling off the boat and when their lack of taking those medications results in deterioration could be a big challenge. And that's the gap we're really seeking to fill with this monitoring, because oftentimes the patients who will not take their medications after discharge are the ones who are also not doing the monitoring. So by focusing so much on that adherence piece, we think that we could really make a big difference in really empowering the whole entire care team, not just the patient themselves, to improve those outcomes for the less adherent of the population. Whether it's because they're just so sick that it's challenging to take the medications, whether they don't want to, there's a ton of different reasons. But we see the application for home technology, not just with the clinician, but even the family members, to be able to help those that they care for and live with maintain the regimens that are prescribed by the physicians and by those who want to keep them out of the hospital and healthy.
So Nick, this is one thing that comes up often in our show as we're talking about new technologies. And I know that Dr. Thamman and Dr. Joe also feel similarly. We realize that a large proportion of the population of people who aren't able to do the things that we may ask them to do upon discharge are not doing it because they don't want to. It is sometimes health literacy. In your case, it may be digital literacy, although you're trying to get rid of that a little bit. But oftentimes it's also just being an hourly wage worker that doesn't have time, having multiple children, being disadvantaged in terms of socioeconomic status. And unfortunately, in our country still, being of certain ethnicities and races actually makes it harder for you to be able to adopt some of these technologies. We've seen that with just virtual visits, just getting on a video call with your doctor. The group at Stanford, the group down at Penn, our group at Mass General, at Harvard, all really had very similar data despite being in different cities, that older patients, patients with low socioeconomic status, Hispanic race, Black race, Hispanic ethnicity, excuse me, those were individuals who were at higher risk. And in fact, those with heart failure may also be at higher risk of not being able to do what we are asking them to do. And what we come to is that it's not their fault. It is a systems issue. It is a social determinants of health issue. And it's up to us to figure out how to do it better, how to explain it better, how to set it up better, as Dr. Thamman's working on doing. So with all of that in mind, let's pick your brain a little bit as you look forward with Kasana. And Ashwin Pillai is excited. He said this will definitely help improve care in post-MI and post-stroke patients. Thank you, Ashwin, for being a loyal follower.
Yeah, I wonder how you
good,
like send it home with the patients. Like, here's your bag of medications and a toilet seat.
Yeah, so how do we get it? How do we both get it into patients' hands? What does that look like for Kasana? And how do you get it to those patient populations that actually could probably benefit from it the most? What are you guys thinking?
It's like discharging with a bottle, like the tank of oxygen. Now you get a tank of oxygen and a toilet seat.
Right. Well, and there's a lot of various tools that patients go home with, even if it's something like a life vest for patients who may need that kind of protection. But, when we look at having, access to good technologies like the seat that can really improve outcomes, we think minimizing the friction, not requiring a smartphone is something that really can expand access to people. Not requiring home internet is another thing that can expand access. Not needing to necessarily know how to use technology at all can expand access with our seat. And while we have all kinds of options for leveraging dashboards and empowering patients, and that's something that we're going to be focusing on in the future as well, it's not required to use the system. So it's a tool that is powerful, but really does open up the options for a really diverse set of people to be able to leverage this technology. Even those with cognitive decline often will still be able to use the bathroom. And that's something that, we see as a really great place for technologies. And when we look at making sure that this is clinical grade and being able to demonstrate that, we have high degrees of accuracy, that's where we think that, really good outcomes can come from, because without the confidence of the data, there's not much that the clinician can do.
So Nick, look at that. John says, great episode. Wondering what you all think patients' reticency may be, if there's potential for Amazon, Facebook, Google, et cetera, to monetize the at-home data streams. Do you think we need some specific interventions to assuage patients' worries, or do you think not a barrier per se? Maybe Nick, and then I know Ritu's
tricky question. Are we wading into some sticky areas? Okay.
No, this is one that's very important to Kasana. Taking people's data seriously, and we have a responsibility to protect their data. And this is exemplified by who our CEO is, Austin McCord, who joined us. He started a data backup company, Datto, that grew to be the leader in these, the backup services for businesses, small businesses. And having that level of expertise is something that we really leverage to make sure that we're keeping this data secure, keeping it safe. We have to be good stewards. We are stewards of this data, and we have to treat it carefully and wisely, and really think about what the patients want first and foremost, and how we can, again, how do we improve outcomes? That's what this data is for. It's for improving outcomes first and foremost.
Ritu, thoughts from you?
I think it's an excellent question. And of course, this is the crux of the issue. Data, interoperability with the data, and who owns the data. Right now, there's no incentive across the United States because the patient is not empowered. They don't know about that their data is already being sold because part of HIPAA that they sign when they come into the hospital or see you, they do not know that they already have relinquished all their rights and the data is already being, sold to every other, all over. It's a huge industry already. The issue for us is cardiologists and clinicians who really, we want to take better care. We want the data to really help us. Ideally, with every click of the EHR, we wanted more information. So patient outcomes are improved, but we're not close to that because the data from Ami's hospital doesn't talk to the data from my hospital. We can't, if you try to combine, what a nightmare that is. And there are, and everyone wants to own the data because it's gold. And, nobody wants to really let go of that. And until it's legislated, it's not happening. I don't see it happening. Maybe other people have more optimistic view, but I just have a very practical approach to this. But I think it's so essential that we get there, because if we were able to, say, pool millions of heart rates and millions of data points for blood pressure, what would we learn? We don't know that, from the real world data. And I think that's where social media will actually play a part, because that's not regulated by EHRs, right? And patients can self-report. They don't sign HIPAA to say, this is my blood pressure or this is my heart rate. And so one of the areas that I'm venturing into is running a clinical trial using social media as a way, perhaps, around this issue. To be determined. For example, the barbershop study that was done, published in the New England Journal, we're trying to replicate that and do that with women and hypertension and using social media. So to be determined if we'll be able to. But the NIH is very interested. All the implementation agencies come in the U.S. NHLBI, they are very interested in what can we do to help the implementation. Which is such an important part. So we'll see.
It's extraordinarily exciting. So I don't know if our audience knows this, but Dr. Thamman has really been a leader and a voice in saying we need to not only do this, but we need to communicate with our own implementation agencies. We need to make sure that legislators are understanding what we're doing and that we know what their questions are and what their needs will be to be able to push that legislation forward. We were really fortunate during COVID. It's an odd word to use, but that there were so many waivers that really allowed us to advance the field of digital health and telemedicine as far as we did. But in order to do this longitudinally, that requires us to be able to answer some questions that they're going to need us to be able to answer to have legislation. And so Dr. Thamman's really been a leader in that. And I love the idea of thinking about social media because, again, it's patient empowerment, and patients really do, at the end of the day, own their own data. If there were one person who owns that data that nobody could disagree with, it should actually be the patient. I sometimes think the success of Apple Health, especially as it first started, was the fact that people just said, okay, sure, like Apple is a trusted product. What brilliant marketing they've done, becoming part and parcel of the world. But people said, sure, I'll give you my Apple Health data. And that was volumes of data that even some of our fellows and attendings kind of start to take and publish off of and learn from to be able to apply. And so I do think that social media in that sense will likely work. We just have to figure out the structure around it, which I'm glad you're there to do that. Excellent. We're looking like we're getting close to the half hour, but just a few questions that have come into me that I wanted to pose to both of you. So the first is people are wondering, as we look ahead and we say, what is happening with the Apples and the Googles and the larger companies? I ask this because some are entrepreneurs who are saying, do I look to them rather than just continuing to do, now my next series raise? And also because you are working with them, Dr. Thamman, when you're working as part of the ACC Council. And I believe kind of that was a Google Health person, Mike McConnell, you're working with, and there's some Apple people there. What do you see? We had them on a few weeks ago, so we kind of had their point of view, but what do you see as the role of these larger companies in working with us and pushing this forward? Or do you think we, continue to work a little bit siloed?
I think right now we're in our silos. I don't think, they're exploring, and their mission is different than, say, what the ACC is, or say I have as an individual cardiologist. and they may or may not be aligned. And the points that are going to overlap and are going to be aligned, we definitely want to share, like writing these sort of guidance document with the CTA, I think, and with Apple and Google, et cetera. I think it's really important because they are also wanting to do the right thing. But ultimately it is a business. So sometimes the motives are, there's just different alignment there. And we as clinicians are trying to do the right thing for our patients, saying, if I have this data, how can I make this person, my patient, better? Like, can I make them live longer? Can I make their quality of life better? Can I make them take their medicine so they don't get a stroke? I mean, the number one problem we'd have in this country and around the world is hypertension, just not controlled, and then all the complications from it, and obviously multifactorial. But I think, that's the lay of the land right now. It could change with legislation.
For startups, especially in this world of these larger companies, there are a lot of gaps still. There's a lot of areas that we have unsolved problems. And the beauty of startups is that we're agile. We can pivot quickly. There's a lot of places for us to innovate. The home, is one part. The other is clinical workflows. Kasana is really focusing on how do we integrate these technologies with the clinician? How do we remain agile and build technologies that will actually be used? And that's something that, many companies can do. I challenge all the entrepreneurs out there to start your business, to go raise capital, to run with your idea. You could change the world. You could help people. Every day that our technology is not on the market is a day that people are not benefiting from this technology. And that's something that really empowers us. And whether you work at a Google in a research lab, or you work at a startup, or you're at a university, you could still make that difference. And really the world is your oyster. There is so much good that technology can do when used correctly, when used in partnership with the clinicians and with those who are really in the front lines with patients. So I really do think that it's something that big companies and small companies can participate in that growth, and really the revolution of healthcare in the home.
Oh, all great comments and great feedback. And we just have some really great questions from our audience. Always impressed by the audience members who watch us. We have Sergey Polivikov. Thank you for watching, Sergey. He's Chief Executive Officer of Well AI, and also a member of the Artificial Intelligence and Genomics Diagnostics International Working Group. He has a great question. In terms of patients owning their own data, the regulation that became law in 2021, information non-blocking and standardized access via, I think I call it FHIR, F-H-I-R. Do you think, what do we think is the steps? Do we think this is a step in the right direction? I know it's a big loaded question, and maybe we should have our lawyers on in this discussion. Great question.
Well, I think that it is a step in the right direction, but it's like a big bucket and it's a drop of water. It's going to take a bit more to fill it up, but I do think it is a step in the right direction. There's an acknowledgement that this is an issue. Many patients have no idea that their data is already out there. That's probably a big part of the public health misinformation epidemic, is that they don't know that part. And, so us teaching that and spreading that information via our channels, I think is going to be an important step, because once the patients recognize this, then they can also advocate for themselves, not just us saying, this is what's happening. They have to believe it and see it. Seeing is believing.
Absolutely. And then we just have some really nice feedback from Ashvin Pillai. Really inspiring words, Dr. Conn.
Thank you.
So, Ami, I don't know if you have more questions for our guest.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I think, the information blocking just made me think for a moment, right, about where we're headed and collaboration. And I think a lot of what we've talked about today, whether it's from the perspective of, startups and scientists and engineers, clinicians, smaller companies, national organizations for medical care, or even, some of the bigger kind of business companies. I think what we're trying to get at is this next stage that we're at now. It continues to be one of exploration, but it also needs to be one of collaboration. And I think that's a little bit of the culture change that is going to need to happen. And it's challenging because it is, at least we here in a capitalistic society, and there is competition, and there's time to market that will always be important. And there's also, I have to say from a clinical standpoint, there's also, which are the patients that we're seeing, and are they coming to our institution or another? And so I think those kind of things exist, and we just need to continually put the word collaboration right up front whenever we're talking, because I think the information blocking issue, just to go to what Sergey was getting at, it's a step in the right direction, as Dr. Thamman said, but I think it's a step in the right direction because we are openly stating we know that there are practices out there by organizations, by technical groups, right? And then by fiscal groups. So it's really all of the different groups that go into delivering healthcare, especially through the electronic medical record. All of those groups have some practices that keep things for themselves. And we slowly need to bite away at what those are and start to stop keeping as much. And I think that's a really important point that Sergey makes.
And then Sergey, everyone agrees with Dr. Conn today. Dr. Conn's always right today. He agrees with Dr. Conn. There are plenty of opportunities for startups, and I would second that and resonate it. It's small, dedicated, not small, but dedicated entrepreneurs on the grounds working closely with clinicians and patients that I think can drive such meaningful change. Just because when you have a big company, they get bogged down in so much. Sergey agrees with Dr. Conn and appreciates what you're doing and says this, and we need more entrepreneurs to work with family doctors and patients.
And, Ami, I completely agree about collaboration being at the forefront, and even looking beyond, collaborating with fellow tech companies or, other people, other companies, but looking at an interdisciplinary approach to collaboration is really important in engaging with nurse practitioners, with RNs and the physician, the patients. There's a whole continuum here. And, the engineer likes to often think that, they're building this technology, it's going to help everybody the first time out, but, people need to be engaged in the whole process, from family members to patients. All of it really plays a big key role in making sure that the technology becomes adopted. And the best way to do that is to collaborate from the get-go, form strong partnerships with, as a tech person, with physicians that you can trust to tell you the honest, dirty truth that your technology, maybe doesn't help in the way that you thought it would. Maybe
Wait, do you need physicians you can trust, or any physician might give you that feedback?
That's true. It's really to get that honest feedback, which is so key, because the excited entrepreneur comes in and you just want to say yes to them. You don't want to break their heart that they're working on this technology. I've seen it before. But being able to be realistic, even if you have a great technology, if it's not going to get adopted, you need to pivot. And the best way to figure that out is through collaboration, through testing, and through partnerships.
I'd just like to add one thing to that. And I think in this space of collaboration and innovation, we need to have more women. And this is also an area that the ACC is trying, and others are trying to promote, because it's less than 5% of all innovators. If you look in tech, the women are just completely out. We need to design for women. It's 50% of the population, et cetera. And I'll be doing a joint ACC with the NHLBI webcast sometime in August on this issue, and talking about, we need innovation, but women need to know what's the path to get there. There are a lot of great ideas, but they may not be formulated well enough. They don't know the roadmap, how to get there. So I think that will be important as we expand sort of this idea of community and collaboration.
That's wonderful. I don't think anyone could have said it better. This is just wonderful. Nicholas, Conn, Dr. Ritu Thamman, so happy to have both of you with us today. Really have enjoyed working with you both, following your work. Really excited to see what's coming in the future for both of you. I think this next year is just going to be amazing. And to those in our audience, I will speak for both of them and say they've been so kind, and we have reached out multiple times and put people in touch with them. So do reach out. Is by social media best for both of you? Is that okay? LinkedIn for Nicholas, probably Twitter for Dr. Thamman would be great. And I'm sure they're going to be great mentors for those of you who are out there and watching. So thank you again. Really an honor to have you on the show today. Next week, we will be back. It will be Tuesday at noon once again. We have two other good friends coming next week. We'll have Rushika Fernandopol from Iora.Health that was just bought out by One Medical, and we'll be having Michael Greeley from Flare Capital as well. Both also people who really believe in the art of collaboration and building networks, and that is what they've thought about as they've built their careers and their companies. So I'm excited to continue on this thread. Again, Ritu and Nick, thank you for coming. Jen, I'll give you last word.
Thank you for Ritu and Nick for coming. Really appreciate all the hard work, and it's always amazing to finally meet Nick in person. And then Ritu, to meet you for the first time, the better half to Dr. Watson, and all the great work. I don't know, maybe
poor Dr.
Watson. Which is the better half? I don't know. The better looking half. Really appreciate all the great work that you're doing, the entrepreneurship, innovation, and really making healthcare a better place for patients. And as always, really appreciate our audience members for watching, engaging, sharing your opinions and thoughts. I don't know if so really appreciate that. And you know where to find us every Tuesday here, 12 noon. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you to our audience and our guests. Bye-bye.